Operation Barbarossa, the Soviet border in the fire of war, June 1941. Europe was in the throes of World War II. Nazi Germany had already dragged the flags of France, Poland, Norway, and the Netherlands, one by one, under its bloody boots. Hitler was dreaming of an unstoppable empire. However, he had another ambitious plan in mind: the conquest of the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa. This was the name of the terrible military operation, the purpose of which was to trample the vast land, resources, and people of Russia under German control. Hitler believed that the Soviets were weak, that Stalin's communist forces were confused and uninspired. But he did not know that this attack would one day put the final nail in the coffin of his empire. June 22, 1941. Exactly 4 a.m. Suddenly, about 3 million German soldiers, 6,000 tanks, 7,000 artillery pieces, and 2,700 aircraft crossed the Soviet border. The attack was so sudden that the Soviet troops on the border had already captured much of the territory before they realized it. The German army attacked along 3 main routes: Leningrad in the north, Moscow in the middle, Kiev and the Black Sea coast of Ukraine in the south. The first phase of the attack was devastating. Air strikes from the sky, panzer tanks on the ground, and infantry from the rear. The Soviet forces were completely stunned. Stalin was almost speechless at that time. He had long believed that Hitler would never break the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact with him. But the reality was terrible. Soviet intelligence had warned him in advance, but Stalin ignored it. Kiev, Minsk, Smolensk, the Soviets were losing cities one by one. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were captured, thousands of tanks were destroyed, and the Air Force was crushed in the sky. Nevertheless, the Soviets did not give up. The siege of Leningrad began, the details of which we will see in the next episode. How a city survived 872 days without eating or sleeping, just for the sake of the motherland. The Siege of Leningrad. Life in the Middle of Death, 1941-1944. As the German army advanced north, they had an important goal in front of them: Leningrad, today's St. Petersburg, Russia's second-largest city, the heart of industry and culture. But more importantly, the city was the birthplace of the Russian Revolution, a symbol of communism. Hitler's order was straightforward: wipe Leningrad off the map of the world. August 1941. Nazi forces gradually surrounded Leningrad. They cut off all the city's roads and railways, cutting off food, water, and fuel supplies. Their strategy was to kill the city from within, not from outside, but from hunger and cold. Then began the longest and most terrible siege in history: 872 days. At first, the city's people were somewhat prepared. There was some food in government, warehouses, factories were open, and schools and colleges were open. But as time went on, the amount of food kept decreasing. In November 1941, the rationing system was introduced. An adult worker received 250 grams of bread a day, again made from rice husks, wood dust, and paper dust. Winter came. Temperatures fell below 30 degrees. Gas was out. Electricity was out. People burned wooden furniture, books, and even the wood of the walls to keep warm. Gradually, a hunger epidemic began in the city. People began to eat dogs and cats. Many even tried to survive by eating the corpses of their own family members. Cannibalism was a forbidden but existing reality in Leningrad at the time. But the city did not give up. The city's factories continued to produce tanks and weapons during the siege. Children were used to make grenades, and women built hospitals, kitchens, and shelters. At the end of 1941, Lake Ladoga emerged as the only ray of hope. The lifeline, the road of life, was built across the frozen lake on one side of the city. The Soviets used this icy road to send food, medicine, and ammunition into the city and to evacuate the wounded. The Nazis tried to destroy this road many times, but they couldn't. The siege was broken in January 1944. The Soviet Red Army finally pushed the Nazis back. The city was liberated, but by then nearly 1 million people had lost their lives from hunger, cold, and bombs. The siege of Leningrad was one of the most painful chapters of World War II, but it was also a story of unprecedented human resilience. The indomitable will to survive in a city surrounded by hunger and death. Stalingrad. The turning point of a scorched earth war, 1942-1943. The year was 1942. German forces were still flying the flag of victory in various parts of the Soviet Union. Hitler now set his sights on a huge industrial city on the banks of the Volga River, Stalingrad, today's Volgograd. This city was not only an important industrial and transportation center, it was the city named after Joseph Stalin, that is, a symbol, an honor. If Hitler could conquer this city, he would be able to break the Soviet Union not only strategically, but also psychologically. On the other hand, Stalin declared, "Not a single step back." The German offensive began. In August 1942, the German Sixth Army, led by Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, entered Stalingrad. In the first attack, many parts of the city were destroyed. Continuous bombing from the air, a vibrant city was reduced to rubble in a matter of days. But the war did not stop there. Soviet forces, especially ordinary people, men, women, even teenagers, took to the streets to defend the city. They turned every building, every rubble into a fortress, house-to-house fighting. The Battle of Stalingrad was one of the most terrible urban battles in world history. German and Soviet troops fought for weeks over a single house. 4 Soviet soldiers fought for 58 days to defend a building called Pavlov's house. On the streets, in the rubble, inside the house, the fighting was at close quarters, not with weapons. Just knives, hands, sometimes bare hands. Winter counterattack, Operation Uranus, November 1942. The Soviets launched Operation Uranus, a counter-encirclement strategy. Rather than attack the main city, they attacked the Romanian and Hungarian forces, the German allies, on either side of the city. The strategy was successful. By December, the entire German Sixth Army was surrounded in Stalingrad. The Germans hoped that Hitler would withdraw them or send them supplies, but Hitler said, "Not an inch will be given back." Meanwhile, food, ammunition, medicine, everything was running out. collapse and surrender. In January 1943, the Germans collapsed. Countless soldiers began to die of cold and hunger. General Friedrich Paulus finally surrendered on February 2, 1943. About 300,000 German soldiers were captured, most of whom could not return. Stalingrad was a turning point. After this victory, the Soviet army not only resisted, but also launched an aggressive offensive. For the first time, the German army completely retreated. This battle completely changed the course of World War II. After the Battle of Stalingrad, the Nazi forces suffered a major setback. The Soviets continued to advance westward, and Hitler realized that a devastating counterattack was coming on the Eastern Front. But Hitler wanted one last turn, an attack that would weaken the Red Army once again. The plan was called Operation Citadel, and the target was an area called Kursk, where Soviet forces were massed on a large high ground. The Kursk area was a natural salient, or high ground, that could be surrounded on three sides. Hitler hoped to surround and destroy the area by attacking simultaneously from the north and south. Soviet preparations. Unbeknownst to Hitler, Soviet intelligence had already learned of his plan. Stalin and Marshal Zhukov quickly began massive defensive preparations in the Kursk area. 5,000 kilometers of trenches were dug, 400,000 mines were laid, hundreds of artillery and tanks were stationed. Soviet fighter jets and anti-aircraft guns were in the sky. It became the most powerful defensive formation in history. The war began. On the morning of July 5, 1943, the Nazi army began its offensive north and south of Kursk. First came the air attack, then came the armored fleet of tanks. The German army sent their most advanced tanks, the Panther and Tiger, huge, heavy, capable of spitting fire. However, the Soviet T-34 tanks were more numerous, lighter, and more maneuverable. Prokhorovka, the terrible dance of tanks. On July 12th, the war reached its climax. The most terrible tank battle in history took place in a small place called Prokhorovka. In one day, about 1,500 tanks faced each other. Hundreds of tanks were destroyed, bombers circled in the sky, and artillery battles were going on the ground. This day was a terrible scene. The roar of metal, the sound of explosions, the smell of dead and burning tanks filled the air. German defeat. Despite many attempts, the Germans could not break the defenses of Kursk. Their forces began to decline, and Hitler was forced to stop the offensive on July 17th. Then the Soviets counterattacked, gradually pushing the German forces westward. Results of the Battle of Kursk. This was the last major German offensive on the Eastern Front of World War II. About 300,000 Nazi soldiers were killed or captured. Hitler's tanks and air forces were severely damaged. The Soviets, with great determination, set out to the advance of the Red Army, the beginning of the fall of the Nazis 1943-1944. After the German army's final defeat in the terrible Battle of Kursk, the course of the war on the Eastern Front completely changed. No longer defending, the German army had to survive the Soviet invasion. Hitler's once confident empire was now forced to retreat. Late 1943, Soviet counteroffensive. The Soviet Army launched several major offensives in a row. In October 1943, they recaptured the Donbass and the Dnieper River region. City after city began to be captured: Kharkiv, Kiev, Zaporizhia. At this time, the Soviet Army introduced a new form of warfare, the fast, offensive, shockwave operation. That is, they attacked from many directions at once, confusing and scattering the enemy. 1944, Operation Barbarossa, the crushing end of the Nazi forces. June 22, 1944, Stalin launched a terrible blow to Eastern Europe, which was called Operation Barbarossa. This operation was so massive that in just 6 weeks, about 500,000 Nazi soldiers were killed or captured. The Red Army continued to advance. Belarus was liberated, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia were occupied. Soviet forces entered Poland. The fire of popular uprising and revenge. Soviet troops entered every city and saw burned-out houses, mass graves, and signs of Nazi brutality. Lviv, Smolensk, Minsk, stories of genocide. Torture and rape spread everywhere. This anger brought more ferocity to the Red Army. Now they not only want to protect their country, but also to take revenge. The march towards Berlin began. In late 1944, the Soviets approached Warsaw, the capital of Poland. The German army was still resisting with the last drop of blood under Hitler's orders, but the Soviet war machine was destroying them one by one. Tank regiments were coming from the Eastern Front. New troops and weapons were being brought in by air raids. The German retreat route was also being destroyed by air raids. Hitler's crazy. Reaction. Hitler could not accept reality at that time. He called his soldiers cowards. He dismissed generals. He asked to start a new suicide operation. But by then the reality was, the Soviet Red Army was now heading towards Battle of Berlin, the fall of Hitler, and the end of Nazi Germany. April-May 1945. The storm of Soviet victory on the Eastern Front became clear in early 1945. Hitler's defeat was only a matter of time. The Soviet Red Army was advancing on Berlin with about 2.5 million soldiers, 6,000 tanks, and 7,500 aircraft. Almost all of Eastern Europe had been liberated. Their ultimate goal, the heart of the Nazi Empire, Berlin. The Battle of Berlin began April 16, 1945. The Soviet Army launched an attack on Berlin from two fronts: Zhukov's First Belarusian Front, Konev's First Ukrainian Front. The German army was almost broken, but Hitler's order was, fight to the last breath. Berlin was surrounded. Hitler Youth Army, made up of old men and teenagers, last pure core of the Nazi SS. Thousands of anti-tank guns and mines planted in the streets, a hellish war. Entering Berlin meant fighting for every building, every street, every apartment building, every metro station became a fortress. The Soviets were slowly advancing through the rubble, the roar of artillery, grenade explosions in every house, tank battles in the streets, bullets flying in the sky. The whole city became a terrible death city. Inside Hitler's bunker. In the center of Berlin, under the Chancellery, Hitler was hiding in the Führer's bunker with his wife, Eva Braun, and his close associates. Every day he looked at the map and planned the battle. But the reality was completely different. By the end of April, he realized that there was no escape. On April 30th, 1945, at noon, Hitler and Eva committed suicide. Hitler ordered his body to be burned so that no one would find it. The moment of defeat and collapse. The Soviets were gradually advancing towards the center. On May 2nd, 1945, Berlin fell completely to the Soviets. The rest of the German army surrendered. On May 8, 1945, Nazi Germany formally surrendered. This day went down in history as Victory in Europe Day. After the war divided Germany and the beginning of the Cold War, 1945-1949. The world was stunned after the fall of Berlin. The Second World War ended in Europe, but a new war began, one that would be fought not with bullets or guns, but with politics, espionage, and the competition for nuclear power. The Cold War. The fate of Germany after defeat. After Hitler's death and the fall of the Nazi regime, Germany was completely divided into 4 parts. Soviet Union, East, 2, United States, Southwest, 3, Britain, Northwest, France, West. The city of Berlin was also divided into 4 parts, although it was within East Germany. Soviets versus Western powers. Where the Western powers, United States, United Kingdom, France, wanted to establish democracy and a free market system, the Soviet Union wanted to establish communism. This disagreement led to the beginning of the politics of global division, East and West Germany, one nation, 2 fates. In 1949, the German Federal Republic, West Germany, was formed in the western part. The German Democratic Republic, East Germany, was formed in the eastern part. The influence of the United States and European allies in the West, the Soviet Union had a tightly controlled regime in the East. One nation, one language, but 2 lives like 2 countries. Berlin, the center of the Cold War. The city of Berlin became the main focus of the Cold War. In 1948, the Soviets blockaded West Berlin, preventing food and fuel from entering. Then, the Western powers launched the Berlin Airlift, the supply of thousands of tons of food and equipment by air. The Cold War begins. The Soviet Union and the United States both acquire nuclear weapons. The CIA and KGB begin to actively work against each other. The world is divided into the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc. One war ends, another begins. Although World War II ended in 1945, a new era is born from its shadow, a war in which 2 superpowers face off for world domination. But no one fires a direct shot. This war is the Cold War. Through these 7 episodes, we have seen the rise of Hitler, the desire to conquer Eastern Europe, the torrential war, destruction and death, and finally the collapse, division, and the beginning of a new war. This story symbolizes the biggest mistake in history and the biggest lesson. Operation Barbarossa was not just a military operation, it was a crazy nightmare, to which millions of people responded with blood and revenge.